The Subcommittee on National Security, Department of State, and related programs will come to order. Secretary Rubio, I am so pleased to welcome you back to the NSRP Subcommittee for today's hearing on the fiscal year 2027 budget request for the Department of State and related programs. Mr. Secretary, because of your extremely busy schedule, that's an understatement, which I would argue has led to an extraordinary record of success for the American foreign policy, we were unable to get your testimony on the budget request prior to the markup of our fiscal year 2027 bill. We hope the bill will soon be considered by the full House and then, as you know, negotiated with the Senate before becoming law. So there is still plenty to discuss today in our FY27 proposals, as well as how the department is implementing FY26 funding provided earlier this year. Now, despite being late in the budget season, I believe this hearing is well-timed. As you may have heard, I just returned from leading a CODEL to South America. I was reminded, once again, how much leadership matters. President Trump and your leadership, implemented by our embassies abroad, has really fundamentally changed the course of our foreign policy and history. And it couldn't have come at a more important time. Following 4 years of the previous administration's efforts to consistently reward our enemies and frustrate our allies. Likewise, we see the positive impacts of the leadership of key partners in our hemisphere, such as President Peña in Paraguay and President Milei in Argentina, who are standing firmly with the United States and our shared values. Despite tremendous pressure, and in doing so, advancing the national security and economic prosperity of our country as well as theirs. But while the anti-American, anti-freedom forces in our hemisphere are really being defeated at the ballot box, they're not giving up. On the contrary, they are aggressively trying to sow chaos, including through violence. All you have to do is look at what they are doing right now in Bolivia. The region also is confronting external malign influences, most notably the PRC, who are not happy about what you and President Trump are accomplishing in partnership with pro-American allies. They're ratcheting up the pressure and will continue to fight back in what is now really contested space that America has ignored way, way too long. The Trump administration is transforming the world in bold and durable ways, and as chairman of this subcommittee, I intend to provide the resources you need to ensure we can double down on our wins and continue to support freedom and security throughout the hemisphere and beyond. However, we don't need to increase top-line funding to do this. In fact, our FY27 bill, reduces spending by $2.7 billion from the enacted level. That is in addition to the $12 billion in responsible cuts to funding that this committee has delivered since 2023, because the greatest long-term threat to our country's stability and security is our debt. So with less funding, this bill does more. I want to repeat that. This bill does more for our national security. We provide an increase for embassy security to keep U.S. personnel safe. We increase foreign military financing and international narcotics control and law enforcement to ensure our partners and allies around the world have the best equipment and training to advance our shared security. I would note that your budget request in two of these areas, embassy security and counter-narcotics and law enforcement, is greatly improved from the FY26 request by seeking levels that more accurately reflect the needs that we see today, especially to carry out President's national security strategy, the President's national security strategy. In the coming years, I look forward to examining more comprehensive budget requests that will support the ambitious and critical foreign policy goals of this historic president. Now, however, I think we both agree that it's not only just how much you spend, it's how the funding is actually spent. As you know well, Mr. Secretary, an America First policy requires careful strategic consideration of how to spend American tax dollars abroad. To that end, our bill maintains the requirement for you, Mr. Secretary, to consider, prior to providing funds, the voting practice of other countries at the United Nations. It also requires an assessment of cooperation on other issues of importance to the United States, such as migration issues, opposing foreign adversaries, and burden sharing, among others. These are all areas of focus where I believe the Department has achieved notable success, and I look forward to discussing them further with you, Mr. Secretary. To support a policy of peace through strength, the committee recommendation for fiscal year 2027 once again supports allies and partners of the United States while countering adversaries and those countries and non-state actors that support our adversaries. Our bill includes steadfast support for our great ally Israel by providing $3.3 billion in foreign military financing, consistent with the U.S.-Israel Memorandum of Understanding, and it maintains critical support for Egypt and Jordan. With respect to confronting adversaries, the United States has been in nearly continuous conflict with the Islamic Republic of Iran since its founding in 1979. For almost 5 decades, Iranians have endured repression, violence, and torture at the hands of the evil Iranian regime, a regime that exports terrorism and brutally suppresses dissent at home and attacks the United States and our allies. Mr. Secretary, last week, Mr. Secretary, on my Codel, we visited the site of the AMIA bombing in Buenos Aires, where in 1994, Iran's just terrorist proxy, Hezbollah, attacked a Jewish center in Argentina, killing 85 people and injuring over 300. And in 1992, Hezbollah bombed the Israeli embassy in Argentina, killing 29 people and injuring more than 200. These are just 2 examples of how Iran and Hezbollah have been exporting deadly terrorism around the world for decades. We have a responsibility to do everything we can to stop these terrorist regimes before they claim more victims. Now, in my view, the coordinated military action by the United States and Israel against Iran's military capabilities, as well as its nuclear program, will help ensure the security of the United States and our allies and partners for years to come. So I'm sure members will have questions for you about these operations, including the status of efforts to help secure freedom of navigation in the Straits of Hormuz and the status of our embassy operations in the region. The committee also continues its long-standing focus on countering the challenge to the United States' national security posed by the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party. This includes funding above the request for our Indo-Pacific strategy, including through fully funding the Countering PRC Influence Fund. This bill strongly supports allies and partners in the region, including Taiwan and the Philippines and Pacific Island countries. As I mentioned at the beginning, I am particularly proud of the fact that the United States has reprioritized the Western Hemisphere and put the Americas first, which has been a major foreign policy priority throughout our history. As with the President's bold action in Venezuela to remove the indicted criminal Nicolás Maduro, the United States is now decisively tackling security challenges closer to home, like putting anti-American regimes like Communist Cuba on notice. Threats to our national security should and will not be tolerated. The bill continues strong support for democracy programs for the people of Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, and calls on European partners seeking support for Ukraine to stand for freedom and democracy in the Western Hemisphere as well, especially in Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. One of the State Department's facilities in Argentina that we visited last week displays a plaque that reads the following. It says the following, quote, "Democracy is still the hope of the world. This is a sentiment that I think we should always remember. More broadly, the committee emphatically supports your efforts to strengthen United States economic ties with countries in our hemisphere. This includes combating the influence of the PRC, securing access to critical minerals, supporting the nearshoring of vulnerable supply chains, and identifying commercial opportunities, such as in countries transitioning away from authoritarian or communist political systems. All of these areas of emphasis align with administration priorities, and I look forward to working with you, Mr. Secretary, on the implementation. Mr. Secretary, we have endeavored in the committee to provide you with the resources and the flexibility that you need to implement the President's America First foreign policy. We appreciate your team working with us to implement committee directives from fiscal year 26. And I want you to know that we will work very closely with you on your priorities as we advance this bill through the legislative process. Now, before I conclude, let me thank you for your service and your family, Mr. Secretary, and also reiterate how much we appreciate the service of the men and women of the Department of State. Let me now turn to the ranking member. By the way, another great Floridian, for her opening remarks, Ranking Member Frankel.
Thank you, and welcome. Mr. Secretary, you know, it really is something that the three of us all served in the Florida legislature together a long time ago. And I also want to say, I want to just thank my chair, who we work very hard on bipartisanship, because one thing I do really believe is when we're talking about facing the world and the challenges, that we have to try to be on the same page. Now, we do have some differences of opinion, which I will talk about today. And I also want to say, Secretary, I saw you this morning, your testimony. This is a very rigorous day for you, and we see you all over the world. And I thank you for your service. I may not agree with everything you say or do, but I have a lot of respect for the time and commitment that you put into your job. On the budget, I'm not going to talk that much about the budget. I really, the comments I have are really going to be on what's going on in the State Department from our point of view, the Democrats' point of view. We do have a couple of missing members I want people to know, because it's primary day in some of the states in this country, and so they're out actually in their reelection. It's not that they didn't want to see you. I just want to say on this budget, last year we worked out, I think, I didn't like the top lines. I think we could have had more money, but the fact is we did come up with a bipartisan agreement. This year, our budget passed here only on Republican support. For us, things were missing, like our paying our dues to the UN, family planning for the women of the world, human rights. We think we have to do a better job on that. And I hope as our budget goes through, we can get together on those points. But at the core of this hearing is about whether America leads or retreats, whether we prevent crises or wait for them to become catastrophes, and whether we preserve the diplomatic, development, and humanitarian tools that makes and will make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. Mr. Secretary, when you started your tenure at the State Department, I was honored to attend your welcome. I will tell you that I thought you were there with me, right? Or I was there with you.
We were together.
We were together with a lot of other people. And I would just say this, your remarks were inspiring. And I left very, very hopeful about your commitment to democracy and American leadership. And then what happened? Doge came in with Elon Musk. I'm not going to go through the litany of names, came in with what I think was an insidious sledgehammer. Because we have witnessed the devastating consequences of the devastation and dismantling of USAID, the terminating of critical health and development programs, and forcing thousands of experienced public servants out of government. And the consequences are not hypothetical. People are living in some of the world's most vulnerable countries, places facing poverty, conflict, hunger, and weak health systems that have long relied on American partnership and leadership. Places like Sudan, Haiti, Ethiopia are losing access to health care. Families are going hungry, humanitarian crises are deepening, and Americans' influence is shrinking as our adversaries are expanding theirs, AKA, of course, China. In just 1 year, Mr. Secretary, these cuts have contributed to more than 750,000 deaths worldwide, roughly 88 lives every hour. Malaria is surging. HIV treatment programs have been disrupted. Health centers have been closed. We hear reports from countries like Haiti, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Bangladesh, and Jordan, where cuts to family planning have forced more than 1,400 clinics to shut their doors, leaving an estimated 9 million women without care and contributing to increases in hemorrhage, infection, unsafe abortion, and preventable death. These are the mothers of the children, the spouses that we expect to be taking care of families. Experts warned us we're on track for millions more preventable deaths by 2030. And meanwhile, a dangerous Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is spreading rapidly, making it harder to contain by the administration's decision to cut funding to the World Health Organization, which has resulted in their staff cuts. And now, this is a good one, or a bad one. At the direction of the vaccine conspiracy theorists, also known as Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, this administration is continuing to withhold funds from Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. And this is an organization which has helped save more than 20 million lives since 2000, immunized more than 1 billion children, strengthened health systems in some of the world's poorest countries, and help prevent the outbreaks of the deadly diseases such as measles, polio, pneumonia, retrovirus, and yellow fever, stopping them from becoming global threats. And now the administration has dramatically expanded the global gag rule, which was in many ways a killer to women, but now to conditioning vast swaths of non-military assistance on ideological requirements unrelated to the mission of foreign aid. And this will disproportionately affect the LGBT community. We should not let ideology get in the way of protecting human rights. At the same time, an understaffed and weakened State Department is expected to absorb the full scope of America's diplomatic, development, and humanitarian responsibilities while operating under restrictive, politically driven directives that often bypass congressional intent. And boy, has that been happening. We were promised that the State Department's reorganization would empower regional bureaus and strengthen American leadership. We do not see that happening. We were told that congressional directed programs would continue. Instead, priorities that Congress has funded and mandated, including food security, clean water, education, and women's empowerment, have been sidelined with little transparency and no clear implementation. And the reality is simple. Too few people are being asked to do too much without the expertise needed to succeed. More than 100 ambassadorial positions remain vacant, including many in Africa, a continent that will be home to 1/4 of the world's population by 2050. And meanwhile, many of our most experienced developmental professionals, grant offers, technical experts, they've been pushed out, leaving an already overwhelmed State Department staff to fill the gap. Because it seems to us that the American appears more focused on short-term transaction than long-term stability. And we are now seeing, and this is shocking. We are seeing life-saving assistance treated as leverage, only offering countries to agree to unrelated demands involving trade, deportations, and critical minerals to get the resources they need for their population to thrive. That's not partnership. I call it coercion. And, around the world, the humanitarian crisis continues. The war with Iran has now entered its 13th week. The Strait of Hormuz, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, remains largely closed, disrupting energy markets and the movement of fertilizer, not just oil, fertilizer, food, and humanitarian supplies. And these consequences are not only felt abroad, but also, of course, here at home, especially to our farmers. So in communities where America assistance was once promoted, stability, where we promoted stability and opportunity, new research is already showing an increased instability and a conflict following the abrupt dismantling of USAID programs with no substitute. At the United Nations, the United States is increasingly absent from critical discussions on human rights, democracy, and women's empowerment. And even as we expect the international community to support our priorities, while we fail to meet our own commitments. That's getting back to our 2027 budget. We need to pay our dues. The result is clear. Our alliances have weakened, our credibility has suffered, and American standing in the world has diminished. We need a State Department and an international affairs budget that reasserts American leadership, honors our commitments, supports those in need, and advances a foreign policy that makes our nation safer, stronger, and more prosperous. Because we know this, when people say, well, what is in it to us? Well, you know what? When people abroad, when they are educated, when the children are educated, when they're not hungry, when they're healthy, there's less opportunity for disruption and chaos and wanting to join terrorist organizations. I can tell you this, and I've said this before. I'm not really bragging, okay? But this is how my son was a United States Marine. He's back home, thank goodness. But he served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He would be the first one to tell you, and I'll be the first one to tell you, that most Americans would rather prevent war than send our sons and daughters to fight them. And that's why soft power matters. That's why what we're doing in this budget matters. That's why what, Mr. Rubio, what you're doing at the State Department should matter. Diplomacy prevents conflicts before they erupt. Diplomacy, not bombs and bullets. Diplomacy. A global health program stop outbreaks before they reach our shores. Development reduces the desperation that fuels extremism. And strong alliance ensure that we do not face threats alone. That's how America leads. That's how America stays safe. And unfortunately, it seems to me, it's my opinion and some others, the administration has abandoned that proven strategy. And Mr. Secretary, really, and I say this in good spirit because in the end, I hope we can come together on our budget. And I hope you'll share today with this committee how the United States intends to meet today's global challenges without sacrificing the diplomatic, development, and humanitarian tools that have long advanced our interests. And we'll look forward to your testimony and to the questions of my colleagues. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. And by the way, having a member of the U.S. military in your family is a very good reason to brag.
All right.
Absolutely. Okay. So we'll now yield to the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, Ms. DeLaura, for her opening statements. You're recognized, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Frankel, for the recognition. And I want to just say welcome, Mr. Secretary, and look forward to your testimony and questions. There is an old saying, often attributed to Benjamin Franklin, that by failing to prepare, one is preparing for failure. That is a fitting description for this administration's foreign policy. To start, the Trump administration has hollowed out much of the American diplomatic corps. There are 195 ambassadorships in the United States Foreign Service. As of May 19th, 109 of those positions were vacant. We do not have ambassadors to either Ukraine or Russia, and the president has been unable to mediate an end to the war there, despite his campaign promise to do so within the first 24 hours of his term. Conflict in the Middle East continues to escalate, with ceasefires all but abandoned. Prime Minister Netanyahu has announced he intends to deploy Israeli forces to occupy 70% of the Gaza Strip, while continuing strikes in Lebanon. Settler violence in the West Bank is becoming more aggressive by the day, and the president appears to have completely given up on peace talks to end the war he started with Iran, resuming military strikes over the weekend. The rationale for the war shifts whenever the president speaks. At first, it was to topple the regime and free the Iranian people. Then it was to cripple their military capacity. Then it was to preempt a response to an attack that Israel was poised to carry out. Then it was to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which was open before President Trump started the war. The most recent justification is to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, a goal they are now pursuing diplomatically after failing militarily. The Iranian regime is still in place. The Iranian people are not free. The Iranian military remains strong enough to control the Strait of Hormuz. I often wonder whether or not anyone suggested that that was something that Iran might do in this context. The Defense Department estimates that we have spent some $30 billion on this war, although the true cost is likely much, much higher. And what do we have to show for it? We find ourselves in the absurd position of having begun a war to pursue a goal that the Obama administration had already achieved more than 10 years ago, but that the Trump administration reversed. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA, was painstakingly negotiated over the course of 20 months by diplomatic experts in close coordination with our partners and our allies. It prevented Iran from enhancing uranium to the grade necessary to produce a nuclear weapon. It allowed for independent inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency, an organization to which we currently do not have an ambassador, by the way, to verify Iranian compliance, which they did. By contrast, the current talks are happening in a much more tense environment, with pressure that's coming from conflict, ongoing conflicts, and U.S. leveraging tactics. There is no clearly defined plan for how a new agreement would be verified or enforced, and it is unclear what international partners would be involved in supporting or helping to implement it. But President Trump tore up the JCPOA less than 3 years after it was signed, and Iran promptly began enriching uranium to weapons grade. After claiming that Iran's nuclear program had been, quote, obliterated less than a year ago, the president is now realizing that you cannot destroy Iran's nuclear program by bombing it. You can only delay it. And the only way to secure a nuclear-free Iran is to negotiate a deal. But after failing to do this, the president threw up his hands in the air saying, and this is a quote, "I don't care if negotiations are abandoned." So here we all are, forced to suffer the consequences of the president's indifference. Americans are paying higher prices for gas, for groceries, and everyday necessities. But by his own admission, the president does not care if the war drags on, and he does not think about its impact on the American people at all. After taking office, the Trump administration withdrew from the World Health Organization and dismantled the U.S. Agency for International Development. Thousands of programs were canceled, and thousands of programmatic experts were laid off. Subsequently, health clinics were shuttered, disease surveillance systems were greatly weakened, all while our global health efforts were withheld and exploited as leverage to extract concessions from partner nations who depend on them, holding them hostage for the health necessities that they needed until they might have agreed to a trade agreement. Now we are faced with a significant infectious disease outbreak in Central Asia and Central Africa, a species of Ebola for which there is no authorized vaccine or treatment, is rapidly expanding and is expected to take months to address. It is primarily concentrated in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where we do not have an ambassador. Ebola does not wait for bureaucratic reorganizations. It spreads when surveillance systems are weakened, health workers are laid off, clinics lack protective equipment, and communities lose the trusted partners who help detect and contain outbreaks before they become public health emergencies. Thanks to years of investment through the Department of Health and Human Services, we have a number of facilities in the United States that are equipped to safely treat patients with Ebola, as well as other infectious diseases. In the 2014 Ebola crisis, we established these facilities. We made a $160 million investment. But this administration is blocking those specialized facilities from receiving Americans who are infected. We have asked numerous U.S. government employees and partners to put themselves in harm's way to help us keep safe. And how does the Trump administration repay them? By slamming the door in their face. The United States spent years building the relationships, supply chains, laboratories, and community health networks that help stop deadly diseases at their source. The Trump administration tore apart that capacity and now wants to pretend the consequences were unforeseeable. They were not. They prepared for failure, and now it is here. Congress and the American people deserve answers. Secretary Rubio, thank you for taking the time to appear before this committee today. We look forward to hearing your testimony and getting some answers to our questions. I thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. Secretary Rubio, your full written statement will be placed in the record. As you know, please feel free to summarize your testimony. And again, thank you for being here. You're now recognized, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. I think I'm going to skip the long opening. You have it in writing. I'll just do a couple brief points. Rather spend the time on your questions. It'll probably be a better use of our time. Just suffice it to say what I told you a year ago and getting back to that point now. A couple things. In terms of U.S. foreign policy.
Stop supporting Israel! Stop supporting Israel! Israel committed a genocide in Palestine. It's still ongoing. And now they're committing another genocide in Lebanon. And what are you doing? You're serving Israel! Stop serving Israel!
All right. The core of our, is that, can you continue now? All right.
Mr.
So
Secretary.
the core of our foreign policy must always be the national interest of the United States. That is basically defining what that national interest is and then operationalizing it in such a way that our foreign policy reflects it. This is across the board in the work of diplomacy and the place in which and that requires prioritization, by the way. It requires us to prioritize some parts of the world over other parts of the world, some issues over other issues. That's just the reality of limited resources, and every country in the world has limited resources, including the United States, despite our vast resources. The second is in terms of how we procure aid and how we provide aid. We are still the world's largest aid provider, and I mean by far, like there isn't a close second. But we don't want aid to solely be judged by how much you spend. We want it to be judged by what its results are. And I think we can talk about it today, but there are a couple points that I would raise that I think are very promising. The first is we've now entered in the global health strategy over 32 health compacts with countries around the world. And these health compacts basically are, the countries that are signing them love it. not just because they're getting the resources, but because we're investing in their domestic resources. In essence, we are trying to lay the groundwork in many of these countries where one day they will no longer need foreign aid because they will be able to sustain it. We're helping build the internal infrastructure other than, as opposed to relying on extensive NGOs and things of this nature in the long term. We want them to build their own domestic capacity. We'll help them, and they're very happy because it also gives them sovereignty over the way some of their aid is being dispersed in those countries. Likewise with humanitarian assistance. One of the great success stories of the last year is we are able, in a time of disaster, to respond faster than we were responding under previous administrations and organizations, and with much more effectively. Jamaica is a great example. They had a hurricane in the Caribbean. Jamaica was heavily impacted. We were able to respond very quickly and very effectively. The same has been the case in a couple of typhoons, and we're doing it now with Ebola, where we were able to program upwards of over $200 million very quickly in responding to it, down to the point of being able to, even through diplomatic means, establish a facility in Kenya for any Americans that are infected as an observation post for Americans. If someone's infected with Ebola, they will be transferred to a facility that could care for them. If they're not infected after the observation period, they'll be able to return to the United States or wherever it is they're traveling to. But we've also provided assistance to the individual or partners that we have at the UN and in other places in providing aid immediately. So I would say that today, foreign aid has become more nimble, more responsive. It's operating faster because of some of the flexibility that you've given us to respond, but also more creative. And that's particularly true in the global health strategy. We can talk more in depth later on about some of the arrangements that we've made with international organizations. As an example, the Global Fund, and our ability to meet our commitments to them. We've worked very closely with them. They're very, very happy with the way we've outlined our contributions to the Global Fund. I think there was a statement today from the UN and OCHA on the work that we've done with them and the ability to provide them the funds and resources necessary to carry out their mission. So I would just say that I feel like, while it is still ongoing and there's only always a process, I feel like we have made dramatic improvements in the way American foreign assistance is delivered across the world, but we're able to do it now, not just in a targeted way, but in a more effective way, in which it's not simply being judged by how much money you're spending. It's being judged by what results are you getting from it. And there'll be more to talk about in the field of PEPFAR, and otherwise, if you want to ask about those, I'll find a way to work it in. But I don't want to take any more time. I want to get to your questions, so thanks for having me.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. And for the members, I'll call on members based on seniority of those present when the hearing was called to order, and as always, going alternating between each side. Each member will have 5 minutes for questions and responses. I anticipate that we'll have enough time for 2 rounds. So let me begin, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, if a country is a U.S. designated state sponsor of terrorism and ordered its Air Force to shoot down unarmed U.S. civilian aircraft in international waters, and kidnapped and held hostage a U.S. humanitarian aid worker, and harbored terrorists and fugitives from U.S. justice, and closely is allies with another state sponsor of terrorism, which is Iran, and provided intelligence and security support to the narco-trafficking, anti-American Maduro regime in Venezuela, and was found smuggling hundreds of tons of weapons material to North Korea, and repeatedly welcomes Russian spy and warships, and encourages thousands of their nationals to deploy to Russia to fight on Russia's side in Ukraine, and is currently giving China access to spy facilities with signal intelligence capabilities, and furthermore orchestrates an extensive espionage network against the United States, and has over 300 military drones within reach of U.S. territory, including U.S. military installations and nuclear facilities. Would you consider a country like that as a threat to the national security interests of the United States?
Yeah, and I think you're describing Cuba, and that's absolutely the case. But I think one more point I would make is all of these violent Marxist, left-wing, radical terrorist groups that operate in many countries have destabilized Colombia, for example, for years, and others all found their seed money from Cuba as well. They sponsored these groups all around the region, and part of the region is still paying the price for the rise of those groups, particularly the FARC elements that have now spun off and are actually carrying out violence as we speak in Colombia.
Yeah, and I hear that from heads of state throughout Latin America, the impact that regime continues to have, the threat to their security, to democracies, and to our national security. Let me shift again also to the Western Hemisphere on Venezuela. We know what happened. This fugitive of U.S. law is now in here in U.S. custody, and that we thank the Secretary, you and the Secretary of War, and in particular the President for his leadership on that. You have laid out what I believe is a clear three-phase plan for Venezuela: stability first, and then recovery, and then transition. Where are we in that process, and are we still on track?
Yeah, first, I think it's important to remind, I think tomorrow will mark the 5-month. I know it feels like it was 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 7 years ago, 5 months ago. That's how long we've been into this process. So let me say, Venezuela is not today where we hope it will be for the peoples of Venezuela's sake, but it is on a trajectory that I think is a very positive one if it continues, and it has to continue. As you said, our first priority was stabilization. We did not want to see mass migration. We did not want to see a civil war. We did not want to see societal breakdown, and that required working to the extent possible and wise with existing institutions, not to preserve them or to perpetuate them, but to ensure that we didn't have systemic breakdown. The second is recovery, which is the phase I would argue we are primarily in right now, and that is the ability to recover their economic vibrancy, to allow small businesses to develop and the like. And part of that is ensuring that the wealth of that country, which is primarily through mineral resources and energy resources, are going to help the people of Venezuela directly. And that's what you see through the Treasury blocked account, is that the money that they're generating from these oil sales is being driven to pay for things like salaries and to buy medical equipment, and things that are beneficial to the people, not being pilfered and used as side hustles to help, cronies. Obviously, more work remains to be done. Ultimately, and other things that need to happen, ultimately, the answer in Venezuela is a free and fair democratic election, because it's not just the right thing, it also is necessary in order for them to be able to attract the kind of investment that they want. In order for it to be a long-term and investable place that can attract the kind of capital and interest and normalize the way their economy works, they will need to have a government that is legitimately in place through elections. But you have to create the conditions for that. Those conditions include free and open media. We've seen independent journalism operating again in Venezuela. That's been a positive. You need to give space and time for political parties to organize and prepare them, position themselves to participate in those elections. You need a new electoral council, because they're the ones that are going to be counting the votes and ensuring that the vote is legitimate. All that work is ongoing. There are multiple areas of cooperation with the interim authority, some of which are not publicly discussed in the proper setting we could, that have been very positive. And I also think, for talking about diplomacy, we now have an embassy open there with Americans on the ground every single day, interacting with the business community, with American businesses that are interested in coming in, with members of the interim government, and also members of the opposition. So I think we're making good progress. We're not where we need to be, but we're only 5 months in, and I think it's important to remember that, because this will take some time. We're dealing with 16, 18 years of a system, and reversing that responsibly will take some time, but we're moving in that direction, I think, in a good pace.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The Ranking Member, Louis Frankel. You're recognized.
First, just very quickly, Iran's proxies have been the cause of so much human suffering, not just in Israel, but around the world. Of course, Hamas was responsible for the attack on Israel. We see Hezbollah shooting rockets into Israel, but other parts of the world. Question is, are billions of dollars or any funding going to go back to Iran so that they can resume to fund their proxies as a result of the deal that you are talking about?
Well, first of all, the deal that we are talking about, or the deal that you've seen reported in the media, is a dynamic situation, because the first thing, sort of what needs to happen at the front end is they want us to lift our blockade so they can get their ships to market. That isn't going to happen unless they open the straits. So that's the first thing. The second thing that has to happen related to the first is they have to agree to enter into negotiations that are on very specific topics, which they have not been willing to do in the past. Number one, they have to agree to negotiate on the issue of no enrichment. Number two is they have to be willing to agree to dispose of
I don't mean to...
I know, but it's going to get to your point, I promise.
Please, okay.
The second thing is that they have to agree on the issue of the highly enriched uranium. Now, what you're asking about is, what about sanctions relief or frozen funds and assets? So let's begin by saying that this regime, as you have rightfully pointed out, even despite sanctions, even despite all the pressure, have found a way to funnel money and resources to these proxy groups. What's being discussed is what do they get in exchange, what nuclear sanctions that have been on them do they get in exchange for compliance for the reason, if they comply with the reasons why those sanctions were put in the first place. All of that will be condition-based, meaning no, there's not going to be some sort of advanced signing bonus or good faith front.
I mean, really, my question is the administration contemplating returning money to Iran so that they can continue to fund these proxies, all that are hurting millions of people?
Yeah, well, if the money is going to fund the proxies, then it won't be returned to them, obviously. I think the question you're really asking is what concessions are you willing to make in a negotiation? There are specific sanctions. Some of them are congressional, some of them are UN, and some of them are from the executive branch. But there are specific sanctions that are in place related directly to their nuclear program.
All right, well, let me just...
That's why they were put in place in the first
Listen,
place.
we're taking back my time. I would just say this. I would urge this administration not to give money to Iran to continue the work of their proxies. But let me move right on, because I want to talk to you about what's actually happening at the State Department. USAID was dismantled. They did so much of the development work, humanitarian work around this world. You told us that the regional bureaus and embassies were going to do the work. We have sent directives from Congress to the State Department, and for example, millions for education, for agricultural capacity, for water and sanitation. How would our directives getting to these regional bureaus and to the diplomats? And when you have 100 plus missing diplomats, who's getting our directives, and what are they doing with them?
Well, first of all, I think 100-something missing, what you're saying is the unfilled ambassadorial posts. But every mission of the United States is staffed. If they don't have a Senate-confirmed ambassador, and we would prefer to have Senate-confirmed ambassadors. Now, as you know, there's a process for doing that. Some of it's, I think we've only gotten like 100-something nominees in State Department through the Senate, and some that I think we need to pick up the pace in terms of appointing people to some of these posts. And believe me, I want that to happen. But I don't nominate them, so we have to work with the White House to get those names out there. Now, on your fundamental question is, what is the role the Embassies and Regionals Bureau play? And I think the answer to that question can be found, again, I want to harken back to these global health MOUs with 32 countries, which is a conglomerate of different aid programs that are involved in helping with health, and it could include water projects. These are often negotiated directly out of the embassy with personnel that are on the ground that are laying the groundwork to do it. The other things the embassies do is they help us identify the areas that would have the highest impact at the best efficient cost in these individual countries.
Just sorry to interrupt you, but what I'm worried about, what a lot of us are worried about, is the lack of expertise. The expertise, so your people in the various countries even know what to do. What has happened to that? So there were thousands of people fired. I mean, how do we know that in each of these countries you have someone there who knows how to fix a water system?
Well, first of all, I think that we would ideally do in every one of these cases that we would be partnering with the local government, with the domestic government, with our host nation, to ensure that we're relying on building their capacity to do this work. And our job, it depends on the country, and that's the unique part of the way we approach this. You could do a bucket, and you can say, this is money for X, and it has to work exactly the same all over the world, or you could do it the way we're doing, which is understanding that a health MOU with one country maybe look very different than what a health MOU looks like in another country. And then we would have to hire or add, depending on the contract, whether it's an international partner or others, if necessary, the expertise for implementation. But the key to the front end of it is identifying what those unique opportunities are, because I can tell you, going through the 32 MOUs, they are all different.
And Mr. Secretary, I can tell you this, that because of whatever the lag time, the lack of expertise right now, there are literally thousands and thousands of people dying. I know there's.
I don't. By the way, I just don't agree with that number. But
Mr. Chair, just one question.
And we'll have another round.
Okay.
We'll have another round.
One more thing. This is very important. All right. We have.
She is a Floridian. I'm going to have to give her.
I understand.
No, we have heard. First of all, this country right now has a immigration policy which is an abomination. We're taking innocent people who have committed no crimes off the street, and we are sending them to countries, some of them that they have no connection to, and we are hearing that the State Department is out there making deals with foreign countries and saying, if you want to get development funds or health care or humanitarian funds, you must take X amount of deportees.
And Mr. Secretary, you're going to have to answer that relatively quickly because we're way
Yeah.
past time.
I don't know where you've heard that from. We have certainly negotiated third country agreements with multiple countries around the world, but none of them are under threat. In some cases, for example, they have said, well, we'll do this for you but we have some costs associated with assuming this responsibility, and we provided them funds to deal with that. But I can't recall of a single instance, I don't know who's reporting this to you, where we're basically threatening a country that we're gonna never deal with them again if they don't help us. But obviously, we are friendly and help, but this is the way diplomacy should work. Honestly, let's be frank. We are going to reward those that are good to the United States. We're not gonna be as friendly to places that are not furthering our national interests. For a long time, this has been going on. There are countries around the world where we were spending millions and millions of dollars, and they vote with us, against us, 99% of the time at the UN, and all the commercial contracts are with China. But yet we're funding their entire healthcare system. Look, I think that's a legitimate thing to say, hold on a second, does this make sense?
All right, let's move on, and we've given the ranking member, because she is the ranking member, and she's my friend and partner, way over time, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for indulgence. Speaking of now, the Vice Chairman of the subcommittee is recognized. Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being with us. I recall when you were with us about a year ago, you talked about the new focus of the United States State Department. I want you to know that I was privileged to participate last week in the CODEL led by the esteemed Chairman Diaz-Balart to South America, and had the opportunity to witness how effective and how targeted our foreign assistance is being used to, in your words, to further the interest of America. It was so incredibly obvious through the empowerment of the ambassadors that I was able to meet there, through the sense of respect that those ambassadors carried, along with not only the empowerment that they had, but the sense of respect that they had from the people in those countries, almost to the same level as their very own heads of state. And it was so heartening to see your words put into action in those countries. It's truly working. We saw evidence that narco-terrorism is being eliminated. We're saving lives here in America because of that. It was obvious that the influence of China is being diminished, and that the United States is being so much more recognized as not only a military and economic strength, but as that soft power that I continue to hear members here on this panel speak of. And so I just commend you and the administration for the work that you're doing. I got to witness it firsthand, and I appreciate the chairman leading such a distinguished CODEL to let us see and learn those things. One of the things that you spoke about a year ago was recognizing America's humanitarian responsibility in countries like this. And I've had a number of organizations, the NGOs, that are charged with administering humanitarian assistance. Talk to me about concerns with the predictability of the funding that this committee has appropriated. And I think you can probably agree it's necessary for them to be able to predict when that funding will come available so that they can plan human resources, so they can plan on supply lines and that sort of thing. What advice can you give this committee and those folks that are charged to implement the humanitarian needs on how we can work better with the State Department on that predictability.
Well, first of all, it's, unless I know the specific programs, it's a little bit harder to opine in general on what you've outlined, other than to say that I think what they'll find, certainly over time, is that their ability to get answers will be much quicker. Now, we still have an obligation and a due diligence requirement in any contract we award, any grant, any monies we obligate. We have to make sure the money's being spent on what it's supposed to be spent on. We have to make sure that it's being dispersed at an appropriate rate and that we're getting a result for it. So I think what they'll find over time is that the system that is managing this for them now will be a lot less Byzantine, a lot less bureaucratic. They may not always get the answer they want on some of these programs, but they will get their answer faster. Our ability to deploy and to partner with an NGO and in case of a humanitarian crisis is an example right now with Ebola. I mean, that is something that has required us to ramp up opportunities to keep it, constrained and ultimately to help deal with it. And we have partnered with Samaritan's Purse. We have partnered with some others who are involved, and some international organizations as well. And our ability to deploy and quickly provide the funding for that, more of a sort of an acute event as opposed to a chronic one, is better than it used to be. We are responding much faster than it was in the traditional system. And the more legacy projects, I think what they'll find over time is once this becomes systemized year in year, they'll become more familiar with our systems, and they'll find that certainty that they need in terms of planning and so forth. But I would just say we'll continue to communicate with your offices on specific programs as we've done throughout the year when people raise one with me and say, this specific contractor, oftentimes what you'll find is because the system is new, they still haven't figured out how to work through it. Once we can resolve that, it becomes more systemized for both sides.
Thank you, and I look forward to working with your department in order to do that.
Great, thank
I
you.
yield. Thank you.
Just a note that on this side, we've been on time, but I'm not complaining. The ranking member of the full committee, it's a privilege to recognize you.
Thanks for not complaining, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, nearly 60% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's illegal war of choice with Iran. The war has led to skyrocketing fuel costs for Americans, needless deaths of American service members, while failing to achieve any of the stated aims of the war. In the meantime, it seems that the Trump administration seems to have forgotten all about the crisis in Gaza. Nearly 8 months after it was signed, the administration's 20-point peace plan stands largely unfulfilled. I have it right here. It looks like there are 4 and 5 have been accomplished, and the rest have not been accomplished here. Most Palestinians in Gaza are sheltering in overcrowded tents, pests and rodents spreading disease. Health services remain limited. Israeli military strikes have escalated despite the ceasefire, pushing the total death toll to nearly 73,000. Late last week, Prime Minister Netanyahu ordered the IDF to seize 70% of Gaza in complete violation of the ceasefire agreement. So, Secretary, the State Department must take the lead for the U.S. implementing the President's 20-point plan. What is the status of implementation? What progress should we expect to see in the next few weeks? What is your response to Prime Minister Netanyahu's directive?
You're talking on Gaza?
Yes?
Yes, okay. So, well, because you started out talking about Iran. So let me just say I disagree
I
with...
said in the meantime, the Trump administration seems to have forgotten about the crisis in Gaza.
No one's forgotten about it. I think luckily there's not active combat operations happening of the kind that we saw a few months ago, but it's still a challenge that we're going to work through. I just wanted to correct the record for a second. You said we had not achieved our stated aim, and I know you went through it in your opening statement.
No, if you don't mind, I have a limited time for questioning, Mr. Secretary.
No, but you gave
My
a long
question,
introduction, and then you're not going to answer some of these things?
No,
They just
well,
get
I
to
want to
sit
get
there?
to Gaza. I want to get to the 20-point plan, which is what my question is about implementing
gave
the
a speech
20-point
first.
plan. What is the status of implementation? What progress do we see in the next few weeks? What is your response
it.
to
So-
Prime Minister Netanyahu's directive?
Let me first start with the status. We are now at a phase where we should be having or want to have an international stabilization force that goes in and provides the security. This requires the demilitarization of Hamas. which right now they have not been willing to meet the conditions necessary. By the way, it's not just the United States that's complaining about it. Many of our partners in the region are pressuring Hamas to enter the demilitarization phase.
So there will be no progress with the 20-point plan unless there is a demilitarized Hamas.
Well, there
Is
are
that
other
correct?
elements of the 20-point plan that are ongoing. As an example, the plan for reconstruction and economic development and the donors that are coming forward to fund it, that continues to move forward and develop. It's just you can't implement it. No one's going to invest money in Hamas, in Gaza, until Hamas is demilitarized, because they know there's going to be another war.
These
They're not.
20 points were to be moving, I would think, and moving along with various phases of implementation as we go along here. In terms of also humanitarian aid, it is all laid out, but as I said, there are only two that have been apparently implemented.
No.
That is with 72 hours of the hostages will be released. So Netanyahu's directive, IDF sees 70% of Gaza. Just your view, because I need to move on.
Yeah, our view of it is, I think those comments he made last week in an appearance that he did somewhere, we have a plan, it doesn't call for that. And at the end of the day, we understand that what we want, and I think what the Israelis would ultimately want, is a Gaza that is governed by a non-Hamas.
So you have no opinion
people-
on the IDF seizing 70%
Well,
of
he made that
Gaza?
statement, but that's
Well,
not
but you-
part of this plan. This plan doesn't call for that. What this plan calls for, and it's what we're committed to carrying out, is that
But
the
there
people
has
of
been
Gaza
no
are governed by-
implementation of the plan.
Well, that the people of Gaza are governed
let
by
me
a
just-
technocratic Palestinian government, a Palestinian.
Please, Mr. Secretary.
No,
we
but
go
you're
round
asking
and
me
round.
questions. You're not letting me answer.
Yes, you are answering them. No, you're not answering them because you don't have answers.
But you don't let me finish.
Let me just say this. And first of all, you talked earlier in your comments about humanitarian assistance and how quickly it's going out. Quite frankly, that hasn't really happened in Gaza. Commercial, not just commercial, humanitarian aid going in. Let me just talk about
That's
the
false.
humanitarian assistance.
That's a false statement. I have to
It is
correct
not
you
a
on
false
that. It's not.
statement.
We spent hundreds of millions of dollars in humanitarian aid in Gaza already. And that includes through the World Food Program and other organizations.
You know, I've talked to Cindy McCain at World Food about the situation, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
So have I.
And the food and
Talked to her all the
hunger,
time.
and
In
it's
fact, I met
not
with her a month
there.
ago, and she
It's
would
not
disagree
there.
with you.
Let me just continue on. Humanitarian situation in Gaza worsens. At the same time, the Israeli government has ramped up its pursuit of a de facto annexation of the West Bank. Oslo Accords have been torn up. Demolition orders for Palestinian villages are on the rise. Incidents of settler violence have surged with no accountability, and the construction of settlements and outposts continues at a rapid speed. From May 12th to May 18th, Palestinians faced more than 50 attacks by settlers across the West Bank, including arson attacks that damaged a mosque, homes, farmland, and vehicles. The UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has documented an average of 6 such attacks per day. The Israeli government has begun proceedings to demolish the Palestinian community of Khan al-Ahmar, just east of Jerusalem, as part of its goal of constructing settlements along the E1 corridor, which would bisect the West Bank, foreclose the possibility of a continuous Palestinian state. Mr. Secretary, do you believe that the situation in the West Bank is one that leads to greater cooperation between Israelis and Palestinians, or will create conditions for a two-state solution and promote Israel's two-state solution, in my view, will promote Israel's long-term?
As the president has stated clearly and repeatedly, he is not in favor of these changes or these changes in the status in the West Bank, that it potentially complicates our ability to work out the deal in
Okay,
Gaza as
thank
well.
you.
And the president's been consistent. He has said this multiple times, and we've shared that with our Israeli counterparts as well.
And what are we doing to deal with settler violence?
We will
the
do
West
that on
Bank.
the, if that's all right, we'll do that on the second round.
Fine.
Because we're way over.
Thank you very much,
No,
Mr.
thank you.
Chairman.
Thank the ranking
Thank you.
member.
Thank you.
Mr. Molinar, who's also the chairman of the Select Committee on the CCP, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Rubio, thanks for being with us today, and thank you for the important work you're doing around the world and for the sacrifice you and your family are making in order to do that. We appreciate it. Also, just want to say my apologies for the young gentleman from the CCP-funded Code Pink, who interrupted your opening statement. I want to go right into some questions about the CCP. I wonder if you could characterize China's support for Iran, military or otherwise.
Okay, well, it's an important question. I think, let me start with this point. I don't think the Chinese have publicly said and repeatedly said and told us in our visit as well, they are not in favor of what Iran is doing in the Straits. They are opposed to that, as is virtually every country in the world, some obviously more open than others, but they've stated that point. I would say that China has not provided any assistance to Iran that in any way impeded our operations or ability to operate. They clearly have had a previous relationship, and you can see that in some of the military equipment that they have is certainly of Chinese origin, and likewise. But we have seen no signs in the short term that during this situation, that anything they've been providing them has in any way changed the dynamic in the battlefield, and I think they've been quite cautious about engaging themselves in it. That said, we would like to see their help at the United Nations. We have a resolution right now. It has the highest number of co-sponsors of any resolution ever proposed before the Security Council that would, create authorities to deal with what's happening in the Straits. And unfortunately, the Chinese continue to threaten a veto of it. So if, in fact, they are against the closure of the Straits, they should be endorsing this, or at a minimum, abstaining and not using a veto of it. The Russians are another matter, of course. They're vehemently opposed to that resolution for a variety of different reasons. But I would say that as time goes on, the Chinese economy will begin to be negatively impacted by what the Iranians are doing for two reasons. The first is because the concept of a tolling system sounds intriguing. The reality of it is very hard to implement. And in fact, you saw a Chinese destined vessel attacked and hit 2 weeks ago by the Iranians. And the second is because if you, for an export-driven economy like China, to have countries around the world's ability to purchase diminish as more of that goes towards fuel, that will begin to have an impact on their exports as well. So I think China, in the short to long term, should have, and we've made this point to the Chinese, have a vested interest as well in ensuring that Iran stop its activity.
Thank you. There was a media report recently that Iran may have used a Chinese missile to shoot down a U.S. fighter jet. Are you familiar with that report?
That report, I can't comment on the specific technology that they use. Suffice it to say that, look, they do own Chinese systems. They own some Russian systems, and they've developed some native systems, especially in the drone technology. But I don't know specifically of that. I mean, I'd have to refer you to the Department of War. I would hate to comment on something and give you a misleading answer.
Thank you. During the recent China summit, I was thankful President Trump raised the issue of China's prisoners of conscience, and the president indicated that Xi Jinping is seriously considering the release of Pastor Ezra Jin, and I know this is something you care deeply about. Have there been any tangible follow-ups or indications regarding this case or others like Jimmy Lai since the summit?
Well, first of all, on Jimmy Lai, the president's raised it twice. He raised it once when we met in South Korea, late last year, October, whenever that was, raised it again during this visit. Pastor Jin is obviously a more recent case, and it was also raised in the meeting. And I don't want to do anything to jeopardize his status or what's working, other than to say that I'm cautiously optimistic that we could potentially find a positive resolution to his case. And those talks and that communication is ongoing. But sometimes with these things, they work better when they just happen. And so I don't want to say anything publicly that could undermine or harm that effort in any way, but be clear that we have raised that, and it is a priority for us.
Thank you. As you know, in Michigan, we're proud to have a large Chaldean community, many of whom are still having deep family and religious ties to Iraq. Iraq's Christian communities, particularly Chaldean Christians, have faced years of displacement, economic hardship, security threats in the Nineveh Plain and surrounding areas. How is the administration supporting religious minorities, including Iraq's Chaldean community?
Well, as you know, they're just recently forming a new government with a new prime minister. And so I think the fundamental challenge in Iraq has been and continues to be what level of influence do the Iranian-backed Shia militias have inside the country over the government. And in fact, we faced that situation very dramatically during Epic Fury when, in fact, there were launches occurring against our facilities both in Baghdad and in Erbil. So it would be raised within the context of our relationship with the new prime minister. We want to give him a chance to be successful, but we also want to give him a chance to be responsive to the issues that we've raised, including the issues just outlined about, unfortunately, a much smaller Christian community than it was there 25, 30, 40 years ago, but still nonetheless facing very difficult circumstances. Obviously, we also want to see a government that's less under the domain or control of these Iranian-backed militias who still remain very powerful in the country. So those have been the leading features, but we're going to give this new prime minister a chance. We're willing to do things that are helpful to him, but obviously we have things that we're concerned about, primarily the Iranian Shia militias and the influence they have and the danger they pose to the region and to the country. But related to that is the issue you raised, and that is these minority communities inside of Iraq who have faced oppression now for the better part of 20 years and have seen their numbers in areas diminish as more and more people have left the region. But it is a priority, and we do raise it because we think it's important for a sort of a diverse nation like Iraq, for every segment of society to have not just representation, but to feel safe and respected inside the country. It is a feature of our talks with them.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Meng, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. As the daughter of immigrants, I'm so proud to represent Queens, New York, the world's borough, and a strong community of immigrants and refugees, including a large Afghan community. Even though we promised them safety in exchange for risking their lives for our country, thousands of our vetted Afghan allies remain stranded abroad, including relatives of some of my constituents. Last month, this administration reportedly decided to close Camp Asaliya and force 1,100 Afghans there to choose between going to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where they have no ties and which is facing an Ebola crisis, and Afghanistan, which would be a death sentence. What is the plan to help our vetted Afghan allies who were promised safety in the U.S.?
Yeah, well, the plan is, and we're working on this very actively, and is to have more than just those two alternatives. And obviously, the Afghan alternative is not one that's realistic for most of them. And so we're engaging every single day, and we think we have a number of other countries that are willing to. Now, the question is not countries willing to assume. The question is how many. We have about 1,000-something people there, and we have to move them. And so I don't think there's one country that's going to take all 1,000. But it has to be countries that, A, are willing to assume some of this responsibility in numbers that are manageable to them, but also places that give more options to these individuals that they would be comfortable going to. So we are very actively engaged in this. As you know, we have a lot of Capitol Hill engagement on this issue from both sides of the aisle. It's a priority for a lot of people. And we don't want to see a situation where any of them are being forced back into Afghanistan, because that's just clearly not an option for some of them. The case of relatives of American citizens, I think, is a separate case in the sense that they have ties to the United States. And so that process, the processing is still ongoing in terms of the applications, the background checks, and the vetting and so forth. We're obviously operating right now under a directive that prohibits the entry of Afghans into the United States, but that could change at some point, and that we'll be able to facilitate some of those. But that issue right now is we're just trying to find more countries that will step forward and being able to assume. In some cases, it might be 200. In some cases, they might be able to take 150, 300, but give them some options other than just those two that you've just outlined.
Can you rule out third country options, especially DRC? You mentioned earlier that the State Department won't deport people to conflict zones. Can you rule that out going forward?
You mean rule out the DRC?
Yes.
Well, ultimately, these people would have to agree that they're going to go to DRC as well, because that's what we want to do, is give them 7 or 8 options rather than 1 or 2. And I imagine if we can find more options for them, and there are some countries. Look, I think the problem is not that I'm trying to, we could probably talk to your staff about it. A lot of these countries are in nascent talks with us about their willingness to assume some of these people, but they don't want me announcing it at a hearing, because then they have, newspaper and media going crazy in their country about what does this all mean. But I can tell you that I know of at least 5 other countries that we have spoken to that seem at least open to the idea of assuming some number of these refugees. We'd like to get these people more than just 5 options, maybe 5 or 6 or 7.
Are they conflict zones? Can we rule out deporting people to conflict zones?
Well, I don't remember all 5 or 6 of them, but I don't think that any of them would be conflict zones, is my recollection.
Thank you. At the same time, we are stranding our Afghan allies. We are rolling out the red carpet for white Afrikaners from South Africa, even though we've completely stopped resettlement of other vetted refugees. The president recently approved 17,500 spots for Afrikaners and none for any other refugee from anywhere else in the world. Can I ask what your standards and justification for issuing only refugee slots for them?
Well, first of all, the United States, over the last 4 years before the president returned to office, assumed upwards of 15 to 20 million people that entered our country through a variety of methods. So our immigration policies must always ultimately be geared by the national interest of the United States. And in an era where we're already dealing with 15 to 20 million people that have entered the country in a mass migration event in such a short period of time, adding to that number in the short term would make no sense, in our view, from the national interest, hence the freeze on refugee admission. The case you point to is a very specific one, probably a time-limited one, and that is we have gauged that there is real interest from a unique subset of people in South Africa who would be interested in coming in the United States and who we assess have a high likelihood of rapid assimilation and success in our society, and hence this program was created. Now, that's not a program that's going to exist in perpetuity. It's a program that's designed to the fact that we are seeing the demand. We are seeing applications from South Africa of people willing to enter the United States, and we think this is a group of potential refugees.
So our
that could very
Afghan allies are refugees. They have been vetted, 1,100 versus this new 17,000.
But it's more than just vetting. We're also trying to determine, again, this is the immigration policy of the United States. Like everything we do has to be geared by the national interest. And it is in our national interest, if we are allowing people to enter our country, be people that can quickly assimilate into society and be successful. And
Why
not become
can't
public
they
charges.
assimilate into society?
Yeah, a background check is
I've been
not
to
the
their
same as
centers in my district in Queens.
Well,
They have assimilated and contribute and pay taxes.
Yeah, but we've already assumed a lot of Afghan refugees. As you said, you have them in your district. We've already assumed a large number in the past. The point is that the general policy has been to limit the entry of refugees from all over the world and then to create the special track because of a unique circumstance in the short term of a high demand from a number of immigrants that we have determined if they pass the vetting and the checking, we very quickly assimilate and contribute to our society. That's what by the way, that's what our immigration policy should always be about, is what's good for the country.
I think it's important for America to keep our promise as well, in the interest of national security, our word to our global allies, to people who we made a promise to. 1,100 versus 17,000, 1,100 vetted allies who already helped this country. I think they should be given consideration and not sent to conflict zones.
And I think,
Thank you,
I
I yield
don't know
back.
if, Mr. Secretary, you want to, and you've already answered, do you want to say anything else?
No, I mean, we talked about the point in the decision that was made.
Yep. Mr. Alford, you're recognized, sir.
Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member and the Ranker for our full committee. I do want to recognize you, Mr. Chairman, for the great work that you've done to help rein in the spending while still protecting America's national security interests around the world. Last year, Chairman Diaz-Balart delivered a 16% reduction from fiscal year 25 enacted levels, nearly $9.3 billion in savings, without compromising support of our closest allies or weakening our posture on the world stage. This fiscal year, the committee built on that success with an additional 6% reduction, cutting another $2.69 billion while still maintaining robust funding for Israel, Taiwan, Jordan, Egypt, and critical Indo-Pacific security programs. These reductions, Mr. Secretary, are only possible because of you and your leadership, which has forced partner nations to shoulder more of the burden and make sure that American taxpayers are no longer footing the bill for countries that refuse to meet their obligations and that really aren't on our side to begin with. And so I salute you. Sir, there is a lot of noise in this world. There's noise out in the hallway. There's noise that we've seen on the back row here. And what I'm about to say is not going to make the news because I used to be in the news. I know what makes the news. It's the clips of the loud people, the Code Pinko people, that want to disrupt and yell hateful things to you, sir. But I want you to know that the vast majority of Americans have a lot of respect for you, have a lot of appreciation for what you're doing. You are a stalwart, a resolute rudder in a sea of chaos. And I just want you to know that we appreciate that. Thank you for the job that you're doing. And I do want to talk about Cuba. Chairman Diaz-Balart brought this up. Is Cuba a threat? And how big of a threat is Cuba to the United States of America?
Well, I think the fundamental threat is that they are a, first of all, thanks for your nice comments. I wish they should give you more time, too. I would say that Cuba is two things about Cuba. Number one is it's a failed state. I mean, it really is. I mean, the model that they have economic will never work. And it will never work because the country's no longer even controlled by the government there. I mean, the people are under the control of the government, but the country's under the control of a private, I say private, a military-controlled conglomerate that controls about 70% of the GDP of the country, sitting on $18 billion in assets. None of that money transfers over to the Treasury or to be helpful to the Cuban people in any way. Meanwhile, they have power plants that have been failing because of years and years and years of chronic mismanagement and lack of investment. So on the one hand, you have a country that doesn't have money to buy fuel, and on the other hand, you have a country that is sitting on a military conglomerate that has $18 billion in assets, and none of it transfers over to the Cuban people. A lot of people don't realize it, and they're accountable to no one. They are the ones in ultimate control of the country. So what you have now is a failing system. Frankly, I think since 2001, is that 15% of the population of Cuba has left, some to the United States, many to Spain or other different countries around the world. They've lost a lot of human capital as well. So it's on the verge of being a failed state because of their mismanagement and incompetence. And the last straw was they lost free oil. Maduro used to give them free oil. That's really the biggest change since January, is they no longer are getting free oil. And we're not in a world where people are in the business of just giving away oil for free all the time. So they're really struggling with that as well. Now, the second thing I would argue is they are also a base of operation. The Chinese, the Russians operate intelligence collection facilities targeted at the southeastern United States from the island of Cuba. That's well documented. Open source has reported on that repeatedly. They are a country that has long links to all of these many of these transnational ideologically motivated groups in the Western Hemisphere. If you travel extensively in the Western Hemisphere, you will find that behind every disruptive element in their society designed to, for example, overthrow or pressure a pro-American government, there is a Cuban element involved, including, in fact, many of these countries have expelled either the ambassador and or multiple personnel from the Cuban embassies because of their intelligence and counter and subversive activities inside of their country. And then they have a long history of supporting actual violent groups throughout the region. So all of these things pose a threat to the United States because a failed state that's friendly to our adversaries, 90 miles from our shores, that's a threat.
So what are we going to do about it?
Well, the first thing we're trying to do about it is find a better way forward for the people of Cuba. By the way, we've made offers to them in this regard. We have offered to distribute $100 million of humanitarian aid through the Catholic Church and other non-governmental organizations. First, they denied we made the offer, so then we went public with it. Then they said they would accept it, but since then have not been willing to follow up on how that distribution would work. We're fine with it as long as it goes to the Cuban people. Because if you distribute it through them, here's what happens. The products wind up on the shelves of the dollar stores controlled by the conglomerate that I just outlined. We know that for a fact. You see the same products, but we've delivered humanitarian aid in Cuba through this mechanism, $3 million after the hurricane that went directly to the Cuban people. In many cases, we wish we had 6 million destined, but only 3 million has been distributed, unfortunately, because they've impeded some of it. And all of it marked with a gift from the people of the United States, so they know where it's coming from. We're offering to do that. We've made offers on a bunch of other things as well. So far, but ultimately, I remind everybody that U.S. policy towards Cuba is governed by law. It's statutory. There's statutory requirements for us to change our policies towards Cuba, embedded in the law in Helms-Burton that passed in 1996. So that governs, that's the official policy of the United States. It's embedded in statute. So we have to stick within those parameters as well.
Thank you. I've gone over. I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Siscomani, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Rubio, for being here with us. Thank you for taking time and answering all the questions. I want to take a moment and start with recognizing the Western Passport Center in my district. They're doing an incredible job. I consistently call, my office does, for passport issues there, and the volume that they handle is incredible, and their customer service is as high as it could be. I visited it in 2024, and just to thank them, and I want to just highlight them for you, just because they're doing such a great job. So I want to start out with that lighter note, I think. Let's go into a heavier topic here. I want to give you also and the president tremendous credit for your work to combat dangerous drug cartels and other transnational criminal networks. Combating international crime is essential to making America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. I want to ask you about another damaging form of international crime, which is human trafficking. This issue hits close to home for my constituents in Arizona. The Department of Justice has identified Phoenix as one of the top human trafficking jurisdictions in the country. And as one of 4 states bordering Mexico, Arizona is a major transit point for traffickers. The National Human Trafficking Hotline has identified over 2,300 cases in Arizona alone, with more than 5,000 victims identified in those cases. Troublingly, the average age of youth trafficked in Arizona is 13 years old, 4 years younger than the national average. There's a strong bipartisan support for the State Department programs to combat trafficking in persons internationally. So given all this, what are the department's regional and or country-specific priorities for programs to combat trafficking in persons? And how are you ensuring that these programs are successfully implemented in support of the national security interests of the U.S.?
Thank you. And obviously, when we talk about human trafficking, you're talking about the international element to it. From our perspective, there's obviously a domestic issue as well, but that's separate from our involvement. A couple points. These migratory routes that existed with mass migration events are the same routes that are used by human trafficking. So clearly, when we had a border crisis, we had people pouring over the border, we had organizations that were involved in trafficking of drugs, contraband, and also people. We know that, and that was a big component to all of this. I believe last year, the number, maybe I'm off by $1 million or $2 million, but it's about $100 million we spent a year ago on human trafficking programs, and it depends on the country. Every country is different. In some cases, some countries are transit zones. They're not sources of human trafficking, but they are a transit zone where human traffickers bring people through. And so oftentimes the assistance is assistance to local authorities and helping to partner with us identify, or if they're already advanced enough in that field, simply sharing intelligence and information as we gather it and pick it up. In other cases, the assistance, depending on the country, is helping prevent human trafficking. In essence, working and partnering with the host government for programs that help identify potential victims of human trafficking and prevent them from being trafficked before it happens. That's the second. And so it really is country-specific, and one of the reasons why it's so critical that these programs not be put in a box and say, here's human trafficking globally. It's a great example of how this program needs to, these expenditures and our focus on this needs to be specific to the location. Because what the human trafficking issue looks like in one country might be different than another country. One country may just be the airport that they're flying people through, and we know it. Another country may be the source of children that are being literally purchased or bought up or grabbed off the streets and being trafficked for labor purposes or worse. And so that's why in every one of our embassies, we have people that are in charge or also supposed to be helping us to implement that program through the regional bureaus so that it becomes specific enough to the individual country and whatever role they play in the human trafficking, whether it's transit zone or source.
Thank you. I know we have a second round, but I'll ask one more. I know the administration is actively engaged in discussions with Israel about the future of the U.S.-Israel relationship, including opportunities to further expand and deepen our strategic partnership. With the current Memorandum of Understanding on Security Assistance set to expire in 2 years, this feels like a real moment to think boldly about how our cooperation can evolve to meet the shared interests and security needs for both of our nations. With that in mind, what's your current state of talks with Israel on the new MOU and the broader future of the relationship? And who in the department is leading those conversations?
Well, the conversations have been both with the Department of State and the Department of War. And actually, and I think he has said this publicly now, what Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israelis have told us is they would like to set up a scenario where they wean off U.S. assistance the way they did with foreign aid about a decade and a half ago. So in essence, they'd like to go from the number they're getting now to slowly less every year until the number hits 0. So those are the conversations we're having with them. It's at a pretty high level at this stage, although I know we're engaging their ambassador, has been dealing with the counselor and chief of staff in our office on this proposal. They've made that proposal to us on a number of occasions over the last year. I think the Prime Minister spoke publicly about it about a few weeks ago, so it's no longer a surprise. But I think one of the things Israel's talking about is basically winding up over the next 10 years in a place where they are getting they may be buying things from the U.S., but they are not getting any sort of assistance through the MOU. Obviously, we'll talk it through with them and see where we wind up. That's not finalized.
Thank you. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Siscomani. So again, thank you, Mr. Secretary. We do have time for a second round, but I am going to hold people to 5 minutes on the second round. We've been pretty flexible, and but we're gonna now limit it to five minutes, and I will start that 5 minutes and try to hold myself, Mr. Secretary, to 5 minutes as an example to the rest. I mentioned in my opening remarks, and you've heard it before, that I just returned from a trip to South America. We saw some really positive things, but we also saw some sobering things regarding Communist China. They've spent decades embedding themselves across the region, frankly, in ports, power infrastructure, communication networks, everywhere. And more recently, Beijing has been aggressively moving to lock up America's critical mineral supply. The chains. And so, again, I think for decades, the United States looked the other way, or worse. You, however, have begun to turn this around. I saw that firsthand. I mean, I actually saw that. You've aggressively refocused State Department resources and attention on countering China's encroachment in our region. In Argentina, your team signed a critical minerals framework with President Milei's government in February. In Peru, I saw evidence of U.S. pushback at multiple ports. We saw that. I saw that. But this subcommittee wants to support these efforts, which brings me to Paraguay, because, frankly, it's the counterexample that the whole region needs to be looking at. It needs to be emulating. Now, so while neighbors have flipped to Beijing, Paraguay has chosen the United States over Communist China. It's held firm with Taiwan for nearly 70 years and posted the strongest economic growth in South America. You've met with President Peña, and you've been directing State Department attention towards partners who stand with us. You've talked about this in this hearing. It's working. It's really working, but I think we can and should do more. What do you need to make sure that this hemisphere continues to see and sees clearly, actually, that choosing America over China actually pays off for their people and for the entire region?
Yeah, I think the first thing, as long as I was served in the Senate for 16 years, everybody said we need to focus more on the Western Hemisphere, just like people say you need to eat more broccoli and more vegetables, but no one ever wants to actually do it. So I'm proud of, at least over the last year and a half, you've seen a more sustained focus on the hemisphere, and it's borne fruit in a couple of ways. Here's the challenge in the region. Not only 20 years of negligence in this regard, but what Chinese efforts in the region have done is twofold. The first is it's resource extraction. So they try to establish for themselves access to critical minerals, mining of any sort, and give themselves these long-term contracts, gain these long-term contracts, and that allow them to extract resources, as they do in Africa and other parts of the world as well. The second is they come in with infrastructure investments, key infrastructure like telecommunications, ports. These are areas we've seen heavy investment in on their part. And when I say investment, I understand oftentimes these come with financing mechanisms that can cause these countries to fall into a debt trap. The third thing they do, frankly, is they come in and they promise to build you an amphitheater or a bridge. They may not do a good job at it, but now you owe them money for it, and then they expect your vote at the United Nations and in international forums as leverage. And the challenge in all of this is that oftentimes a country will come to us and say, we want to build X or we want to expand Y, but the only people showing up are Chinese companies. There are no U.S. companies showing up. There are no American alternatives showing up or Western alternatives showing up. And so part of the challenge that we have is to identify and connect those U.S. alternatives and not U.S., Western, allied alternatives to what the Chinese are offering, and to make a compelling argument. And this is the important work of our embassies that they've been focused on. And they'll continue to do. So I think continued support for those efforts is important. We have a fund that provides us a little bit of flexibility that we've asked for in our budget requests that will allow us to very quickly act if an opportunity presents itself. And it's not just State Department money. It would allow us to leverage the resources of the Development Finance Corporation in some cases, depending on how the deal works out. But we most definitely want to see alternatives to what the options have been available to these countries in the past have been, in many cases, solely Chinese companies or Chinese-related companies.
Yeah, and we heard that everywhere. Now, look, it's going to surprise everybody. I've got 46 seconds, but I'm going to stop now. I know. No, I'm not going to give it to anybody else at the request, but I am going to recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, again for being here. I want to talk to you about I'll give you two unhappy questions. I'm unhappy about this. It's about congressional directives and laws that are being ignored. Number one, the women of the world. Women, when they have access to education, capital, jobs, and ability to fully participate in our economy, they lift families out of poverty, they grow markets, they strengthen communities, they create more stable societies. When they have a seat at the table in governments and peace negotiations, peace agreements actually last longer and nations are more secure and prosperous. We passed 2 laws. You were the sponsors, I think, of one of them, Women in Peace Security Act of 2017, the Women's Entrepreneurship and Economic Empowerment Act of 2018. And we have not been able to find anything that's being done at the State Department responsible for having these programs carried out. And then we get this notice. I am like, I can't even believe it. From your office, the administration does not have a dedicated strategy to increase engagement by women and girls in democracy, human rights, and governance programs. This is not acceptable. And it's not only is it not acceptable, it's just wrong. I'm telling you, if you want to have this country, our country, to be safer, more prosperous, more healthy, you have to uplift the women and the girls of this world. I am pledging to work with you to do that, and I hope you will. I want to go on to another point, which is Gavi. We provided the State Department $600 million for Gavi. That is the vaccine alliance that delivers life-saving vaccines and protect children from deadly diseases like measles, malaria, polio, and so forth. Its work has reached nearly half the women's children and has saved over 20 million deaths since the beginning. And now your State Department has not distributed this or not allowing Gavi to distribute this because you're waiting for a response from a vaccine conspiracy theorist. I almost put terrorist. Yeah, he's a health terrorist. Robert F. Kennedy, this is so wrong. I just ask you, I think we asked you about this before, to commit to getting these funds out. Can you do that?
I mean, first of all, I don't think it's fair to call Secretary Kennedy a terrorist. I mean, he has strong views on health issues, and you may not agree with them, but I think by and large, he's also made a positive contribution to this administration in a variety of fields, whether you agree with it or not. That's I
Okay,
agree
well,
with it
anyway,
or not.
listen, you know what?
But let me talk about Gavi in specific. As you understand, that obviously that's been largely a State Department prerogative in the past. At the direction of the President, we've allowed Secretary Kennedy, we've worked with Secretary Kennedy on his input to get reforms from Gavi. He wants reforms from the organization, and we've been supportive in pushing those reforms. And what I told the committee in the Senate a moment ago is we've now reached the stage, not anything negative towards Secretary Kennedy, where we've now reached the stage where the State Department will become more engaged in making sure we can reach an outcome, because we have to get to an outcome here.
Okay, but just
that
to
allows us
reserve
to
my time,
preserve our
I heard
equities.
what you
But
said.
we do want the reforms that he supports.
All right, well, I don't know what reforms. I can't even imagine this man knows what he's talking about. But the fact is, we need to get these vaccines out. Then I just want to, I do want to just say this, that we're still waiting for reports to Congress on the Women, Peace, and Security Act. I hope you can get that to us. You told us that the regional bureaus have dedicated staff on women. Tell us who to call, because we haven't been able to make any headway on that. And I just want to end with this. 2 things I wanted to say. First of all, this ICE is an abomination. And what they're doing, and the immigration policy in this country is an embarrassment. It is inhumane. But it is crazy that you want to let people in from South Africa because they can assimilate, while you're throwing out hundreds of thousands of people who have already assimilated and that are important parts of our economy and family life. Secondly, I just want to end with this. I hope that this administration will have the patience in reaching a diplomatic agreement to keep Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. But a trade-off should not be giving them the ability to fund proxy terrorists. And with that, I thank you again for being here, and I yield back.
Thank you, and you did. Mr. Edwards.
Thank you again, Secretary Rubio. We appreciate that you've had an intense day up here on Capitol Hill, and that
More intense here than the Senate, I'll tell you that.
you've been here to share your thoughts, your philosophies, and you've been so transparent with this subcommittee, even where there are obviously some places that we don't agree. But I again can't tell you how much I appreciate the focus of the administration abroad. With that, I've just got one question, fairly short. The U.S. Foundation for Natural Security and Counterterrorism was passed into law as the U.S. Foundation for International Conservation at the end of 2024. And as you know, this foundation was created with the understanding that mismanaged, impoverished, and protected areas across the globe can become safe havens for transnational organized crime, drug cartels, and terrorist networks, all core principles that would fit under the America First agenda. However, funds for the foundation, now under the purview of the State Department, have not been launched, and the funding is frozen. And because the foundation's 2-to-1 private-public match, there's about $600 million that could be stabilizing East Africa and the Sahel region, cracking down on illegal Chinese fishing, stopping cartel-driven deforestation in the Amazon with protected area enforcement. Is this foundation something that you're committed to? And if so, what would need to happen for that to become activated and for the funding to be released?
Well, you may correct me if I'm wrong. I think the foundation depends on some appointments that need to happen to there's a governing structure to it that has both presidential and congressional appointments. I think those have not happened yet. And I know that's probably taken longer as a supporter than you would want it to see happen in others. We can't really activate this until it's stood up, and right now it just hasn't been, the governing structure of it is not in place for a variety of reasons. I would imagine part of it is the change in administration with so much going on. We just haven't gotten to the point where we've gotten, I don't believe we have the congressional appointments either on that. I may be wrong about that, but I don't believe so as well. So let me get back to you on where we stand on these appointments, because having that governing structure in place is what's necessary in order for it to be deployed. I can tell you I've heard a lot about it. It has strong supporters in both the House and Senate in both parties. If I'm not mistaken, I think Senator Graham was involved in this effort in the Senate along with Senator Coons, and I'm not sure who the sponsors were on this side. So we've had numerous inquiries, but we've got to get those appointments before we can activate it.
All right, thank you. We'll follow up as well. I yield.
Thank you. Ranking Member DeLauro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, we're currently in the midst of a significant outbreak of a type of Ebola that has no authorized treatment or vaccine. The outbreak is occurring in a region of the world that really is highly insecure, and in the wake of the administration's withdrawal from the World Health Organization, the dismantling of USAID, and the State Department's restructuring of global health engagements, impacting the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It is now my understanding that the State Department is now rushing millions of dollars for the response. I would have preferred for funding to be spent on preparedness and detection, just as you outlined in your global health strategy. But here we are, with a growing case counts and people dying. In 2014, in an op-ed, you wrote that it was, quote, inexcusable, end quote, that no senior official had been designated to lead the U.S. Ebola response under President Obama. And today, there is no single designated lead. And the senior National Security Council position responsible for coordinating infectious disease and biosecurity is vacant. Mr. Secretary, who is in charge of the Ebola response, and how is that different from what you called inexcusable in 2014?
Yeah, well, it's different in a couple ways. First of all, our response has actually been faster than the response in 2014, both in the ability to flow funds to our partners in the region and in standing up all kinds of facilities. Let me answer the second question first and then get back to the first. We are, at this time, it's an interagency process in which multiple agencies are involved in this response. The U.S. State Department's taking a lead in some aspects of it, but even Department of War is involved in the sense of flowing, for example, the standing up of this clinic, this observation post in Kenya that will allow us to observe exposed Americans or suspected exposures for 21 days. If they are infected, those Americans will be transported to a treatment facility somewhere in Europe or maybe stateside. If after 21 days they're not infected, they continue home. We're standing up that facility. But we flowed, I believe, well over $200 million to partners in this response. This is not a scramble. This is something that broke out in a rural area of a war-torn country and was underreported for over a month. Not because of anything other than the fact that it was in a rural area in a war-torn country that was highly unstable. On your first point about who's in charge, one of the things that's being discussed in the interagency is whether we need to stand up a specific individuals for this specific case. And that's been proposed. There are a couple people being considered. I don't want to use the term Ebola czar, but someone with the qualifications to sort of serve full-time in the coordination of the interagency. In the interim, the interagency has a daily meeting on this, and we at the State Department have a task force 24/7 on it as well.
But it would be in keeping with what you talked about in 2014, to have a single person in charge. It's always better to have a point person, I think you would agree.
Well,
that is
ultimately, you're
leading the
trying to
charge,
coordinate
working
multiple
with the agencies.
Yeah.
Because it has to be interagency, but there is one person who is coordinating them, and the information flows through. So apparently you are thinking about doing that. I think it would be sooner than later, and I would just say that I think in the wake of withdrawing from World Health and dismantling of USAID, I think it has put us in a position of really trying to play catch up in this because we should have learned from 2014. Let me just, last year you testified that, quote, "no children are dying on my watch," end quote. Due to the termination of USAID, it has been estimated that the total number of additional child deaths is more than 500,000. While we'll never know the exact number of deaths, I believe that there have been additional child deaths from diarrhea, from malnutrition, from pneumonia, from malaria, and HIV. I would hope that we would really not accept the consequences of the termination of these programs, because it is unacceptable to see that kind of death and destruction, but that we will have learned that we need some of these programs and the apparatus to be in place that help us to prevent these illnesses and be able to respond rapidly, so that we can be in the position of the United States of preventing death, particularly amongst the children of the world. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield
Thank you,
back.
Ranking Member. And
Well, I just say this number keeps getting thrown around. I dispute that. Those numbers are nowhere near reality. That's not reality. That's not a reality that 500,000
Well, I
people
would
that
be
says
happy
that
to try to document it, but
700,000
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired.
Well, what about my
Thank-
time?
Well,
Do I get time to
that's-
respond, or I just have to
I
listen?
think, I think it's fair for him for the Secretary just for a quick response.
Mr. Chairman?
The question was asked, and we've been going a
Fine.
little bit
And-
over.
And then if that's the case, I can go back and
No, no,
take a look
we're
at all
just-
the areas in which this is documented, what the losses are,
Ranking
because I
Member.
have that information.
Thank you. The Ranking Member, you can always submit that to the record if you well desire. and
Well,
we-
I just want to
we accept
respond to
it.
that point. 'cause
Let's just
it's
give a
important.
quick response, and then
Yeah,
we'll
the
move
quick
on.
response is this. No country in the world spends more money, not even close, than the United States does on humanitarian assistance. It's not even close. We spend more money, I believe, than the next 3 or 4 countries combined. So I would argue if there are such tragic cases happening, and I'm sure there are around the world, it's not because we're not spending enough money, it's because the rest of the world is not spending enough money.
Mr. Chairman,
we will-
126,000 children died from diarrhea,
Member, if I can ask the Ranking Member-
155,000 from
I'm
malnutrition.
going to ask for Ranking Member to suspend, please.
Well,
We've-
but we gave the gentleman a time
Well, it was-
to
you-
challenge
if I can ask-
documented information.
But how
If
is
I-
diarrhea?
wait,
solely
hold
the
on,
responsibility of the United
order.
States?
Because the programs that deal
The
with
ranking
that
member-
have been
The
dismantled.
We
ranking
spend more
member-
money than
I
anybody
hear
else.
you, Mr. Chairman,
Thank
and
you.
I want to be
Thank you.
responsive. I
Thank you.
yielded, I ended at my
All right.
5 minutes.
We will continue.
I
think
ended with my 5 minutes.
you got your questions. The Secretary, I think, answered it. Now we will go to Mr. Molinar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you can add on to whatever you'd like to say further, but I also want to ask if you can, we've learned a lot over the past few years about critical minerals, about reliable supply chains. You've been doing a lot in this area with Pax Silica, Quad Critical Minerals Initials Framework. After you maybe respond, I would love to learn a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, I made my point. My point is we spend more money than anybody else on foreign aid, by far, not even close. And we're going to spend it smarter than we ever have before as well. I mean, part of these health compacts, 32 countries around the world have signed compacts with us that will allow us not just to deal with the acute cases that are occurring, but actually strengthen the health programs of these countries so that they become self-sustaining over time. Some will get there in 5 years, some may take 10. But all these countries love these MOUs because we're building their domestic capabilities to address these challenges. I've always said the best foreign aid program is an aid program that ends because the country doesn't need it anymore. South Korea is a great example. This was a country that was an aid recipient. Today they are an aid donor. We'd love to see that replicated, and these countries that are signing the MOUs love it because they've gone from an era of dependency to an era of self-sustainment that we're helping and partnering with them directly with their healthcare systems. We're not just standing up NGOs that come in from abroad and go into the country and tell them this is what you need to be doing. We are empowering the national health agencies of our partner nations so they can deal with this. Now, on the issue of critical minerals, look, it's an issue of global consensus now. Forget about which country it is. It is not healthy for the global economy, and frankly, it is dangerous for national security and the security of the world to depend on any single country for 90% of anything that's critical to your industrial base, your defense base, your technology base. And so I think we hosted Pax Silica, which you mentioned, is a great conglomerate of countries that have signed and cooperating on protecting particularly the supply chains related to artificial intelligence and development in that field, as well as hopefully standards that go associated with it. In the field of critical minerals, we had a ministerial, I don't remember, but March or April this year, earlier this year, we had 36 or more countries attend the critical minerals ministerial. And every country you go into today, and at every embassy around the world, critical minerals are a key component of our diplomacy. Not just the access to the raw materials, but the ability to process those materials into a usable product that are critical. And obviously, we are doing that overlaid with a mapping of our vulnerabilities. And I don't say our vulnerabilities. These are the vulnerabilities of Japan, the vulnerabilities of South Korea, the vulnerabilities of the majority of Europe, and frankly, of the world. We simply have a hyper-concentration of whether it's critical minerals or you could add pharmaceuticals to that, concentrated in the hands of one country. And it leaves us dangerously dependent and cannot continue. And dangerously dependent because you can be cut off in a crisis, you can be cut off in a contingency in which they use it against you for leverage. So it's an all-hands-on-deck approach, and I would say almost anywhere you travel in the world, you will find, if you interact with our embassy, that critical minerals and critical mineral agreements and critical mineral cooperation has become central and core focus of our economic diplomacy around the world.
Wanted to just follow up on a little bit of a separate issue, but it's something that I know you think about. When you think about Haiti and all they've been through, what more can the administration do? What more can Congress do? What ways does the international community need to step up?
Well, on Haiti, we have this gang suppression force which replaced the MSS that was standing there. It'll come at a fraction of the cost to the U.S., about 100-something million versus 800 or 900 million, because other countries have stepped up and donated to it. The force is actually over-recruited. The number of commitments we have for the force is larger than the number of slots we needed available. And the core of it is this: these gangs won't just sit back. These groups won't just sit back and watch gangs operate. This international security force that will be there will be on the ground to take and hold territory from the gangs so that the government can gain in strength, hopefully be able to have an election, but also take back their economic vibrancy. This is an effort that was endorsed at the United Nations. It took a lot of work at the United Nations to get it approved, so that's what's opened the door for all these countries to join it. It's going to be a challenge. Haiti's a very big challenge, but this is the best plan we've had in a long time to address it. It has the support of the international community, not just rhetorical support, but monetary support and troop contributions and police contributions. And we hope it's successful. It has to be successful because there is no plan B at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Mang, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, this administration has claimed to prioritize curbing waste, fraud, and abuse, But in this department, you've overseen the destruction of over $8 million worth of birth control bought by U.S. taxpayers, even though many organizations have already offered to buy and to distribute them. These are the same birth control methods used by millions of women and girls here in the U.S. If distributed, they could have prevented an estimated 110,000 unsafe abortions and the death of over 700 moms. Your department is attacking them. Earlier this year, 66 of my colleagues and I sent you a letter in January asking about the status of these supplies, but we never got an answer. Secretary Rubio, what is the status of these birth control supplies?
We're operating under executive directive not to participate in these programs internationally. The United States is not going to fund this internationally. It's as simple as that. I mean, that's what's happening.
But these products already exist. How much have taxpayers spent to keep them in warehouses instead of distributing them?
Well, I don't know what it costs to store them in the warehouses per se. I think some of them, as you pointed out, have been disposed of. We're not going to use them. The government of the United States is not going to be involved in distributing contraceptive and all these other things around the world. And that's a directive we're operating under from the executive order, and that's not where we're going to prioritize our funding.
Okay, these supplies are not damaged, expired, or destroyed. Do you have any issues with them being distributed?
We're going to follow the directives that are in place. I have an issue in us being involved in that. That is not what foreign aid in the United States is supposed to be paying for. To be honest, it's not. Foreign aid of the United States should be to advance the national interest of our country, and that's what we're going to focus our resources on. And I know there'll be disagreement. People are, making noises in the background here, but here's the bottom line. Well, look, at the end of the day, that is the policy of this administration, and we're going to execute on that policy. Our foreign aid is going to be about advancing the national interest of the United States. And we don't view that this is in the national interest of the United States. We don't know what core national interest of the U.S. do these programs advance for us.
We're not just making noises. We're concerned about preventable deaths and life-saving measures for women, for girls, for...
I understand, but this at an internet, again, the United States, there are a lot of worthy causes and worthy endeavors around the world. The United States government is not a charitable
But not women and
organization.
girls around the world.
No, of course women and girls. And every one of our programs, every one of our programs that have to do with foreign aid, be it our work with the Global Fund, be it our work with PEPFAR, be it our work with these MOUs that we have in place on fund, every single one of these involves, I would say in some cases, more women, girls, and children than they do adult males because of the nature of the aid that we're providing. But you're asking about a very specific type of aid.
If I could ask, in March, the New York Times reported that Ken Jackson, a senior State Department health official at the time, wrote a memo to OMB Director Vogt on these supplies, including the option to distribute them. To your knowledge, did Mr. Vogt receive this memo, and did he have anything to do with these decisions?
I don't remember that article that you're pointing to or the memo in specific that
Do
you're
you
talking
know if
about.
Mr. Vogt had anything to do with the decisions about
Well,
these
we always,
supplies?
as you guys know, the role that OMB plays, they issue directives on spending to the agencies. That's the role they've always played. That includes in the formulation of the budget we've presented to you. I can't speak specifically about whether he saw that memo or whether someone in his office addressed it.
So, I mean, Mr. Secretary, you were here in Congress before. You know that for over 6 decades, in a bipartisan way, the U.S. has supported these international family planning programs. They have saved the lives of tens of thousands of women and girls for pennies on the dollar. Last year, despite Congress directing funding for international family planning programs on a bipartisan basis, you told me, quote, "There is no plan to spend that money. We're not going to be in that business globally. We're not going to do it." Just earlier this year, Congress again funded these programs. I want to know, what is the plan, and under what authority are you refusing to spend taxpayer dollars directed by Congress?
Well, again, we're working through directives for this year. We'll be in consultation with your staffs about the ones that we're going to be pursuing, and we'll bring those available to you as we make them. But the policy that you reiterated that said last year is the one I've stated here again today pretty consistently. On the issue of directives that you just asked about, I know the appropriations bill from last year had a number of them, and we'll be working with your staff we haven't finalized yet which ones we have a problem with and which ones we don't, but we'll be doing that here very shortly.
Oh my
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Alford, you're recognized, sir.
Well, thank you once again, Chair. Thank you, Secretary. The first World Cup match in the United States of America, I think, is in 9 days. Team Argentina arrived in Kansas City yesterday. We're hosting them. A lot of tourists, or millions of tourists, are coming to the United States of America. Can you talk about what your department has done to get ready for this massive influx of visitors and make sure that cities like Kansas City receive a return on their investment for these events?
Well, as you know, we set up an expedited process for visas for people that own the FIFA card. In essence, the FIFA, you have to prove that you have a ticket, you purchased the ticket, you still go through the vetting, you still go through all that process, but you have to prove that you've bought a ticket to a game, not just that you're coming to attend. So that's for the fans' perspective. And so far from what we're interacting now on a daily basis with FIFA and the World Cup people, we feel really good about the processing. There are a couple places that might be more challenging, but by and large, if you own a FIFA ticket and you've registered through that program, you will receive expedited processing to make sure you can attend matches in the United States. Obviously, it's also being hosted by Canada and Mexico, so that provides some level of complexity because some of the matches might begin in Mexico and wind up finishing in the U.S., but nonetheless, we feel pretty good about where we stand on that. In the case of the athletes and the teams themselves, obviously that's been handled separately. They're applying differently. They're still going through the same vetting by and large, but for the most part, we have not had any reports of any teams having a struggle to get here, except for, I will highlight this. The Iranian team has chosen to stay in Mexico as opposed to the United States. In the beginning of the match. And we have no problem with the athletes, as we stated earlier, or their support staff. But what we're not going to allow is for them to embed in their delegation a bunch of people that we know have nothing to do with athletics and have ties to the IRGC or things of that nature. So we were going to watch that very closely, and we'll continue to watch that very closely. But by and large, I don't anticipate that problem with any other country.
I want to end our final moments talking about global media, real hot topic last year. Can you update us on the new broadcasting plans with recent changes to the government's global media investments? How are we reaching people in the communist authoritarian nations? And how have widespread internet outages, for example, in Iran, affected free media from entering into these contested spaces?
So while I believe that that program is under the jurisdiction of your committee, we don't entirely, that's an ancillary function to the U.S. State Department. Nonetheless, we have great interest in how it works out because it does have an impact on our diplomacy, on our foreign policy. As you highlighted appropriately, that there was actually an internet outage. It's shut down. The internet was completely shut down in Iran until very recently. It was restarted. So even VPNs wouldn't have worked because you had no access literally to the pipes. They've restarted some limited access to the internet because it was devastating their commercial sector. But it's been problematic. It's been damaging, no doubt about it, and shows you how critical and important it is and why authoritarian regimes are so fearful of it. As you know, recently there was a court order that basically stopped all of the reforms that have been put in place by the previous administrator. So we've had to go back to the drawing board and begin from scratch on rebuilding that global program as a result of that court order. All the decisions that were made by the previous director were also eliminated. Again, we don't control it, but we are involved in giving input and guidance because it does have a direct impact on our ability to conduct diplomacy and on conditions within these countries.
Got a minute 30 left. I want to ask one last question. I'm going to pivot back to Gaza just a bit because there's been some allegations made that maybe we aren't living up to our commitment to this 20-point plan. Is the case, sir, not that having to do with Hamas? Hamas was left in place by the previous administration who tied Bibi Netanyahu's hands, refused to let him finish off Hamas, and now we're still having to deal with these terrorists who keep popping up and threatening the people of Gaza who want to get on with a normal life.
I mean, at the core is that the issue with Gaza is that our hope is not just for a peace deal. Our hope is for a complete rebuilding of it in a way that's positive, that gives people economic opportunity and some level of governance for themselves without having to be run by a terrorist organization. And so the key to that is investment and attracting. And there's plenty of interest. As I said, both donor countries in the region, companies that want to be involved in the redevelopment, and good people in charge of sort of envisioning what that would look like. The fundamental challenge at the end of the day will always be that you can get all the pledges you want for assistance in rebuilding. You can get all the interest you want from those who want to go in and be a part of it. No one is going to invest there as long as Hamas is militarized. Because as long as Hamas is militarized, they know that there's going to be a war in the future. There just is, if Hamas remains in place. So the goal now is to demilitarize Hamas. That is the impediment that's holding up the rest of it is still ongoing, all the planning, all the meetings, all of the, but the impediment to actually effectuating many of these other points is that Hamas still refuses to demilitarize. And it's not just us that are frustrated by it. Many of the partner countries in the region that helped put this deal together are frustrated and pressuring Hamas to comply with that requirement as well.
Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Before I recognize Mr. Siscomani, I just remind the gentleman that two of those players on the, well, at least two, maybe more, but two that I'm aware of right now, top of my head, who are playing for the Argentina national team, play weekly in Miami, Inter Miami. So anyways, thought I'd mention that. Mr. Siscomani, you're recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, everyone here on the panel has welcomed you, and thank you for being here. I'm not sure that our welcoming nature is totally reflected on the 60-degree AC setting in this room. It's freezing, at least for an Arizonan or a Floridian. Maybe in the hot seat it's not, but over here it's felt pretty cold. But I do wish to end with more on the warm side of things. And it's been said already by the chairman and some of my colleagues here on the critical mineral side of things. The backbone of our defense system, this is more a statement than the question, because I know you've answered it already, but I want to agree with you on this. Energy infrastructure and the emerging technologies right now, China dominates the global supply chain for many of them, and you address that. This is a serious national security vulnerability. And in Arizona specifically, we play a major role in solution. My state produces nearly 70% of the U.S. copper and has significant untapped critical mineral deposits that could meaningfully reduce our dependence on foreign supply chains. Yet permitting challenges and the lack of diplomatic coordination continues to slow the process. So I wanted to mention that. If you have any further comments on that, please go ahead. But I just have one question on Nigeria, and then you can cover both if you want, and then that'll be the end of my time. I want to acknowledge the administration's counterterrorism successes along the Nigerian partners against Boko Haram. These are meaningful steps forward. Defending people of faith from persecution remains a top priority for this subcommittee, which is why our FY27 bill conditions assistance to Nigeria, one of the deadliest places in the world to be a Christian today. This committee also submitted recommendations to the White House on violence against Christians in Nigeria, and we hope those inform the path ahead. With that in mind, how does the department intend to move forward on this issue, particularly on the atrocities, prevention, and religious freedom protections?
Thank you for that. Actually, it's an interesting, not that we were unaware of it, but it was congressional attention to this matter that first brought it to the forefront. Even though we've been monitoring it and watching it for a while, it's members of Congress that really accelerated public attention on the plight of Christians in Nigeria. One of the first things we did immediately is engage with Nigerian authorities, because in many cases what was happening there was not a lack of willingness on their part, it was a lack of capability. In essence, they were confronting groups that in many cases had better weapons, more sophisticated weaponry. In some cases, they were facing a real domestic challenge. And they too jointly identified these terrorist groups, which are the ones that are conducting these massacres, as a threat to their security. We were able to enter into very cooperative arrangements with them. In fact, I've met with their national security advisor on a number of occasions. I know our Department of War folks are working with them quite closely, and have been able to conduct two, significant joint operations targeting these groups, one on December 25th, one as recently as 2 weeks ago that eliminated the number two in the global ISIS affiliates in terms of the, and a very successful operation that in addition to eliminating these individuals, captured a substantial amount of intelligence and items of intelligence value that will inform not just further operations there, but operations in other countries or threats emanating from other countries as well. Since then, we've conducted a couple of other joint operations, much smaller scale. So I think we're at a stage now where the cooperation between the United States and Nigeria in going after these groups is pretty substantial, and I think a good success story. And it's the work of both diplomacy from the State Department, but frankly also, good liaison work with the Department of War.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Siscomani. As a reminder, members, as you all know, may submit additional questions for the record. Mr. Secretary, look, you have multiple hats, Secretary of State, National Security Advisor. Let me just thank you for your outstanding service to this great country of ours, and also thank you for your time today. You've been very generous with your time. This concludes today's hearing. The Subcommittee on National Security, Department of State, and Related Programs stands adjourned.